Welcome to the MamasteFit podcast. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the magic moves of labor. So what are some magic positions that you can do to suddenly create tons of labor progress? When should you use different positions? And what are some alternatives if maybe that magic move doesn't work for you? Welcome to the MamasteFit podcast. This is Gina, perinatal fitness trainer and birth doula.
And I'm Roxanne, labor and delivery nurse and student midwife.
And this is the MamasteFit podcast, where we empower you on your prenatal fitness, birth, and postpartum return to fitness journey.
Our podcast shares how to move throughout your pregnancy to stay strong and comfortable, because pain is not a requirement of pregnancy. Understand the science of birth and how to approach recovery after birth.
We share our personal experience as mothers navigating this stage in our lives, plus our professional expertise as birth workers and fitness professionals.
Our goal is to help you feel confident as you navigate the perinatal timeframe for an empowering pregnancy, positive birth, and postpartum journey.
We are glad to have you with us on this journey and that you have chosen us to support you.
Welcome to the MamasteFit podcast. We're going to be talking about what the magic moves of labor are, because if you ever had an issue during your labor or you're a birth worker and someone's labor is having a little bit of a stall, you've probably been told to do the sideline release or to do this movement or to do this movement, and suddenly everyone is going to change and their baby's going to be flying out of them. That's usually the story that I hear being told when it comes to all of these different magic moves. But it's important to know, what are these positions even doing that is potentially causing this big change to happen? And then also, when should you use these different movements? Because not all of them make sense depending on where baby is within the pelvis. So if I'm trying to do something to create more space in the bottom of the pelvis to help baby finish their rotation, I don't necessarily want to do an inlet opening magic move. That just wouldn't make any sense. And then vice versa. If I'm trying to help baby engage into the pelvis, I don't necessarily want to focus on a magic move that's targeting the bottom of the pelvis either. So understanding how these different movements create space in the pelvis and facilitate this big change can be really helpful to those of you that are birth workers and for those of you that are navigating your own prenatal experience. So let's start with first explaining what the different levels of the pelvis are so that you can understand how each of those pelvic levels open, so that when we talk about different movements to create more space to facilitate this big change, you have a better idea of what that means.
So with the pelvis, there are 3 levels of the pelvis that the baby is maneuvering through to be born. The top of the pelvis is the inlet. This is where baby is trying to engage into the pelvis. And to figure out where baby is within your pelvis, you can just go by intuitive movements, or they're going to do vaginal exams during your labor, and they can tell you based off of your station where baby is in the pelvis. So the inlet would be -2 or above. And those numbers go from -3 to +3. So -2 and above is the inlet. Baby is trying to engage into the top portion of the pelvis. The mid pelvis is the middle portion. And this is about -1 to +1. And this is where baby's rotating through the middle portion of the bony part of the pelvis. And then the outlet is the bottom portion of the pelvis. This is about +2 until baby is born. And this is where baby is trying to exit the pelvis and our bodies. During each of these levels, there are different maneuvers and positions that will benefit to help progress labor. And there are different magic moves per se that work for each part of the pelvis that may not work for other parts of the pelvis. So let's start with the inlet, Gina.
So common issues with the inlet or the top of the pelvis is baby's ability to enter or to engage into the pelvis. And so what we want to focus on for the top of the pelvis is, one, creating more of that space. So we want more external rotation with abduction to widen the space side to side, and then also more of a posterior pelvic tilt to create more space from front to back. And one of the movements that's going to do that is going to be Walchers.
And Walcher's is a well-known position in the birth world for birth workers, and it is not a comfortable position. I did not go into it personally during my labors. Maybe I did unknowingly, but for every person that I put into this position, they're can I please get out?
And so what Walcher's looks like is your legs are going to be dangling off the edge of the bed. And I've done it a handful of times with doula clients to really try to help baby enter into the pelvis after all of our other maneuvers have not worked. And so this is not my first first line movement that I'm trying to do. This is like a last resort kind of engagement movement. So you're going to come all the way to the edge of the bed. You can take like a pillow or like a rolled up yoga mat and put it like right underneath where the sacrum is. And then your legs are going to dangle off the edge of the bed. And so what this is doing is, one, your legs are going to slightly externally rotate just from the way that they're hanging, which is going to create more of that space side to side. But your legs are going to come to full hip extension. And when we have full hip extension, it actually tucks the pelvis underneath. So it tucks that sacrum underneath to create more space front to back. So if you Google this image, and we'll include a picture on the YouTube video of what it looks like. If you Google this image, it looks like someone's in a really big back extension. So you might be like, how is that a posterior pelvic tilt if they're arched in their back? It's because of the full hip extension that actually is tucking that sacrum underneath. And so this is creating like tons of space in the top of the pelvis. You usually sit in this position for several contractions until you feel like a big shift. And this can really help baby engage or enter into the pelvis. But again, it is not comfortable. It can be painful for someone to be in. So this is like a last resort for me. Now, if the baby is already engaged, I would not do this movement.
It's not going to help.
This would not be what I would do.
It's not going to
What else can we do if we're trying to help baby engage before we get to Walcher? So like, when have you found to be successful?
So similarly with Walchers, what we're doing is that full hip extension with the external rotation. So if you have an epidural, you can still do Walchers. You're not going to have your feet dangle as much, like you just kind of have them dangle on the bed. But what I find I use more as my first line magic move, if someone has an epidural or their baby is not engaging and they don't have an epidural, is the flying mermaid. I call it a flying mermaid. I think it's flying cowgirl. But it's literally the same thing, but side lying with a peanut ball between the knees. I have had lots of success putting people into that position when their babies were -2 and above, even sometimes -1 and above, and being on one side and then the other side for 30 minutes. If someone does not have an epidural, honestly, sitting on the toilet, I found to be really helpful if they can't get into a deep squat. Like a deep squat, people will go into, and that'll help engage their baby. But sitting on the toilet will also help because they'll, one, relax, and also their baby will, like, they're in that weird, like, deep squat position. So it's like the opposite of hip extension, but you're getting that wide knees on the toilet to get that external rotation. So those are like probably the two things that I've used.
You can also do froggy Walchers, where
that's like with epidural.
Similar setup where the legs are dangling off the bed, but instead of the feet just hanging, you're going to get a butterfly pose.
Yeah.
To have that external rotation. So your butt is on the middle of the bed and your feet are on the foot of the bed, and then we lower the feet so you're in that hip extended position. But it's usually much more comfortable than like the legs dangling, and it's probably a little bit safer. Not that Walchers is unsafe, but you need like to have a lot of people there ready because you don't want someone to slide off the bed. Like, obviously. So like this is a safer alternative to me, and I think like more accepting of like everyone in the room, because it can be really like nervous. Like you can be really nervous, like somebody like dangling off this bed, especially if they have an epidural. So it's more comfortable. It's also like easier for like the birth team to feel confident in supporting somebody in it. And usually it still creates similar types of space. And so those would be like different like magic moves that I would use. We can also do things to just address baby's position that may be preventing them from entering into the pelvis, such as using an inversion to help baby adjust their head position to enter, doing upper mid pelvis openers like the fire hydrant with the peanut ball or the exaggerated side lying, and then doing these like inlet opening exercises have all been like things that I have found to be really helpful to help baby enter into the pelvis. But Walchers, not my first line of.
With Walchers, one thing that we can see if you're on continuous fetal monitoring is a prolonged deceleration. And this is due to sometimes those babies going from like the -2 station to like being born. That rapid descent through the pelvis can cause a vagal response, and this can cause baby's heart rate to decrease. And most babies will recover from this. It's just that vagal response. Like when you go down a roller coaster, you have this weird sensation in your body and you need a second to recover. Babies are the same way, where they have this vagal response. They need to recover from that decreased heart rate. You can also see where babies just need a little bit more time if they go from -2 to being born within a very short period of time. That rapid progression through the pelvis can cause that vagal response where they're almost stunned when they come out and they're born, and they need a couple more seconds to like start breathing. Usually everyone in the room is a little concerned, but a lot of babies need like sometimes 30 seconds up to a minute to kind of like figure out like, hey, where the hell am I? Especially when they go from -2 to all of a sudden out of this world.
So something else that I found to be very helpful to like help baby just get down in there is just standing up.
Yeah.
Just stand up. Now, obviously,
Gravity.
if you have an epidural, like it's hard.
Standing and inversions are probably the one thing that is beneficial for a lot more than just the inlet. It's beneficial in the mid-pelvis as well as the outlet.
Yeah, because for me during my own labor, and I know that you experience this too, and I see it with all my doula clients where I'm like, if you just stand up, things are going to shift. And like, I'll think it in my head too when I'm in transition.
Oh yeah, when I'm in labor.
Like, I know if I stand up, that baby is going to drop.
I will say it didn't work for Joan. She still needed 45 minutes.
But we are going to have a baby. And I have to like work myself up to like, I'm like, okay, I'm going to stand up and we're going to start pushing. And I find that it works really well for a lot of my clients.
Or even with epidurals, if someone wants an epidural, but they're really at that point, like that teeter-tottering between like, hey, you're about to have a baby or you're still in active labor, we'll sit them up for their epidural. And then like 2 minutes into the epidural, they're like, my baby is coming out.
I've seen that too, which is pretty funny. So another magic move is just gravity. So
Yeah.
just move into an upright position. And sometimes that's just what you needed for baby to wiggle their way on down. So let's talk about the next pelvic level after the inlet is going to be the mid pelvis. And the common issue that you may see with the mid pelvis is baby finishing their rotation underneath the pubic bone. And so commonly what we need is the lower mid pelvis to open with more of like internal rotation and adduction. So kind of like a closed hip position. And this is usually easier to do with like a slight posterior pelvic tilt. A posterior pelvic tilt makes internal rotation easier to achieve. And so the movement that's really going to create that like finishing of the rotation. So if someone's like stalled at 8 centimeters and their baby is like +1 or 0 station, doing a sideline release can help again to create tons of space. And so once you have some strong contractions, that baby just finishes that rotation and they're like being born pretty much. So what the sideline release is it's a movement where you're towards the edge of the bed or to the side of the bed and you're on your side. So your shoulders and your hips are stacked and the top leg is going to fall and dangle off the bed. And then your partner is there to kind of spot you and then also to keep your hips stacked. So they're not applying pressure anywhere. They're just trying to keep your hips stacked. What happens with the sideline release is when your leg falls down, it's coming into that closed hip position, which is creating a lot of space in that lower mid pelvis. And so it's creating tons of space for your baby to finish that rotation. It's also a pelvic floor like release and stretching movement as well. So it's creating tons of release in that posterior pelvic floor, which for a lot of us can have a little bit more tension. And so this is why this movement tends to really help with babies finishing that rotation. Commonly, you'll do like 3 to 4 contractions on one side, and then you'll flip and do 3 to 4 contractions on the other. I would say like if you were only going to do one side, to do with the left leg falling off the bed, because most babies are rotating from the left side. And so if we create more space in the left lower mid pelvis, we'll probably see the big change happen there. But like we've also done it where like nothing really happened and it was like, oh, and that could just be related to like you need strong contractions for the sideline release to work. Your baby also has to be low in your pelvis. Like if your baby's still trying to engage, a sideline release is not going to be helpful. I've also heard people say like the sideline release opens the entire pelvis, which again, there's no one movement that is going to open your entire pelvis.
What?
Now it can cause like a lot of release and relaxation and like the pelvic ligaments and like the musculature, which could be very beneficial to different levels of the pelvis. But when we're talking about like the bony structure and the muscles that are supporting the lower pelvis, the sideline release, in my opinion, is really creating space down there, which is why it's really beneficial when somebody's like 8 centimeters and like their baby is just having a hard time finishing that rotation, or even if they're 10 centimeters, but they don't feel like an urge to push, like the sideline release can be really helpful. And you can do it both with an epidural and without, again, because the leg is dangling off the bed. I usually like to let the birth team know, hey, we're going to do the sideline release, just so like they're aware, so they don't walk in like startled. And usually like the nurse or like the midwife will like just hang out in the room to like, because usually if it's going to work, there's going to be a big shift very quickly.
And a baby.
And so they're just kind of like also like waiting to catch a baby.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, you can even do it when you're pushing. So like for me, I had that urge to push with Joan's birth and I did sideline release and I think it helped. And maybe it was a little bit of just relaxation. But I think like when I was laying down, my contractions got like, I was able to kind of cope through the contractions a little bit better in that sideline release, and it kind of helped relax things before I like repositioned and she was born a little bit later. I know time is relative, but so let's take a break from this episode to hear from our sponsor, Needed.
So I am currently in my second trimester and I am still taking Needed's products to support my pregnancy. I've used it for prior pregnancies. Roxanne's using it for postpartum and all of her pregnancies. So we really love Needed. Right now that I'm in my second trimester, I'm feeling much better and I'm taking their prenatal multivitamin, like the pill.
The capsule.
Which is really the capsules, which is I could tolerate now. I'm also taking their vitamin D supplement as well to help support my thyroid health, in addition to their collagen, because I need a lot more protein during my pregnancy, especially now that I have resumed my workouts and I am exercising much more than I did in my first trimester. So those are just some of the products that I take from Needed. I love them and I highly recommend them to you as well. If you want some optimal nourishment to support you throughout your pregnancy, you can also take these postpartum as well to continue to support you as you recover in the postpartum.
And you can use code MamastePod to get 20% off your first order or the first 3 months of a subscription.
Something else that can be really helpful if you don't want to do the sideline release, because if you're unmedicated, the sideline release, again, is not very comfortable to be in. It can be really intense because there's so much change potentially happening. You could also just do hip shifted movements, which are accomplishing a really similar type of opening in the lower mid pelvis. They're both going to be closed hip positions that are creating that lower mid pelvis opening and also release of the posterior pelvic floor. And so like you can either just take a pillow, fold it in half in all fours, and then shift your weight over to that hip. And that's going to be more of a hip shifted position. If you have a yoga block, you can do that as well. From all fours, shift your weight over. You can do it standing, where you're putting weight into one leg and you're rotating the pelvis on that femur. We'll include some links to breakdown videos in the show notes below so that you can see what these movements look like. And know that if you want like a birth prep circuit that includes hip shifted exercises, we do have a free birth prep circuit that involves an all fours hip shift and a standing hip shift, both which you can do during labor if you're trying to release some of that tension. The all fours one I find to be more beneficial for somebody who has an epidural, because obviously it's less likely that you will be standing with an epidural outside of the bed to do a hip shift. If you do have an epidural, though, if you can't get into a tabletop position, you can also do a side lying position with the peanut ball, where your partner just kind of rocks your leg back and forth, or you can do like a partner hip shifted movement where they grab your leg and essentially force you into that hip shift. And we'll link our YouTube video that demos these different movements as well, because they are a little hard to like understand verbally. But anything where you're shifting into a closed hip position more to one side, so think that pelvis is rotating on the femur, is going to create more space in the lower mid pelvis, and that's going to help babies finish their rotation. And so those can all be really beneficial if like you're in the later parts of labor, you're pushing and like baby is just not getting underneath that pubic bone. These are some like magic moves that can be really beneficial. So now when we make it to the bottom of the pelvis, the one magic move that you may have seen on Instagram and even like our own Instagram page is knees and ankles out to create that internal rotation to create more space in the bottom of the pelvis. And now it's important to note that it depends on where your baby is. And so there is some nuance to it. So if your baby is not underneath the pubic bone yet and they're rotating and rotating, it's okay to do the internal rotation to create space, because that may be all they need to get underneath that pubic bone. But if you're having an issue with baby getting underneath the pubic bone, so you're like pushing and pushing and pushing, and they're just not finishing that rotation, we want to focus on those hip shifted movements, or like the sideline release, or those things that are creating space in the lower mid pelvis so that baby can finish that rotation underneath the pubic bone. Now, if baby is underneath the pubic bone, and so they are stuck in a good way, usually you can see some of their heads sticking out a little bit. That's where the knees and ankles out is going to be really beneficial, because now baby is in the pelvic outlet. So like we talked about before, there's no one movement that opens the entire pelvis, and we want to create space based on where the baby is. And so if the baby's at the bottom of the pelvis, that's when we want to open the pelvic outlet. If they're still navigating the mid-pelvis while you're pushing, we want to create space in the mid-pelvis where they're at. And then when they finish that rotation, that's where the knees and ankles out can happen. And now you can do knees and ankles out with prompting that internal rotation, all sorts of pushing positions. Commonly, you'll see it on our Instagram page with an all fours position where the knees stay in and the ankles rotate out. Or you might see it like on a supine position where you're on your back with knees and ankles out. You can do it sideline, you can do it standing, like you could do it in literally any position where the knees are just closer together than your ankles. And then the knees don't need to be touching by any means by that, because that would be really uncomfortable, I think,
yes.
to like bring your knees all the way together. But it's just like a little bit of that internal rotation. It creates tons of space in the bottom of the pelvis for baby to kind of finish their birthing process.
And usually when you're doing the knees and ankles out, it's like you can see the top of baby's head.
Yeah, like it's
Like,
pretty.
if you can't see the top of baby's head,
it's now time.
if you can't, it's probably time to do the other like mid pelvis, the lower mid pelvis hip shift or side lying release, maybe not really the knees and ankles.
Yeah, so you got to think about where baby is when we're using these magic moves. So if baby is trying to enter into the top of the pelvis, we want to do inlet opening movement. So Walchers would be like the ultimate. Like,
I mean, it's a magic.
It is.
Because if nothing else has worked and what Walchers does not work, nothing likely will work.
Yeah, so it's like a last resort type of movement, but we could do other movements that create space on the top of the pelvis to help baby engage and enter, such as like an inversion to help baby align better to the inlet. And then those upper mid pelvis openers with those open hip positions like the fire hydrant, exaggerated side lying, and then those inlet openers such as Walchers, which would be the last resort, froggy Walchers, which the feet are supported, and then even like flying cowgirl or mermaid, where we're finding a similar type of opening in the top of the pelvis to help baby enter or engage. Also, just standing up and like lifting your belly and tucking your butt underneath can also help like baby enter into the pelvis if you have the mobility to be in an upright position.
Your partner can also like come up behind you and lift the belly for you. I think Gina did that for me in my first labor, and it felt both good and bad.
Yeah, it's like lots of pressure, but like also it's
nice.
very relieving.
I think I did it myself in Joan's labor.
I did it during Sophie's labor.
I did it myself, and it was like shortly before pushing too. So
as we move to the mid pelvis, though, we want to be focusing on commonly creating space in the lower mid pelvis, because that's usually where we're seeing more issues with baby finishing their rotation out of the pelvis. And so the side lying release can be helpful here. Hip shifted movements can be great. They can either be hip shifted movements that you do by yourself or your partner helps support you. So those can all be really beneficial to help baby finish that rotation. Inversions can also be really helpful because it can sometimes adjust baby's head position. So if their head's a little tilted or they're like not quite, they're like kind of crammed into a space that's a little tight for them, inversions can help them like back up a little bit, kind of like a car parking in and out of the spot. To also help them get into a better position to finish the rotation.
It could also help relax and release like ligaments and pelvic floor muscles in that inversion, so that when baby does come back in with the contraction, like you're in a relaxed state, because again, you can't jab a baby through like a very tight pelvic floor. It needs to be relaxed, and that can help relax the pelvic floor enough for baby to kind of wiggle its way through.
Anti-gravity.
Both gravity and anti-gravity.
And then also just upright position. Standing can be really helpful during this
Research-backed upright movements during labor in general, very beneficial.
The toilet for all phases.
Dilation. The dilation station. I do find it more helpful in like the beginning portion. Unless your toilet is like pretty.
I don't like the toilet at all.
Yeah.
It's too much for me.
I love the toilet. But last, the outlet. Doing the knees in, ankles out when you can see the baby. Don't do it before you can see the top of babies.
Do you need to focus
on mid-pelvis? Mid-pelvis.
So hopefully you learn why some of these magic moves work during labor, when to use specific ones, and some alternatives, because I would not immediately jump to Walchers.
No, please use something else.
Engaged. Like I would not immediately jump to side leg release if I needed to help my baby, because they're not comfortable positions to be in. It's also important to know like where baby is, because I'm not going to do Walchers if I'm trying to push, and I'm not going to do side lying release if I'm trying to help my baby engage into the pelvis. It's about opening the pelvic level based on where the baby is currently trying to navigate. And so if you want to learn more about different labor positions that open different pelvic levels, check out our online childbirth education course. If you're a professional, we have our birth workers course and our fitness trainer course that we incorporate movements to help you understand how to open each pelvic level. For our fitness trainer course, it's going to be a lot of birth preparation exercises to help you train your clients to be able to create space within your pelvis. And so if you want to check out any of those, you can check them out on our website. We'll link them all down below. You can use code STORY10 to get 10% off our childbirth education course, prenatal fitness programs,
anything,
professional courses, literally anything.
Any and all
on our website.
This podcast is also sponsored by Needed, a nutrition company focused on the perinatal timeframe that both Gina and I have used during our pregnancies, postpartum. We love them. And you can use code MamastePod to get 20% off your first order or the first 3 months of a subscription.